everyone. Welcome to Korea This Week. I'm your host, Sang Kim, and today we have Troy Stangarone, our Senior Director for Congressional Affairs and Trade with us. Thank you for joining us, Troy.
Thanks for having me, Sang.
Great. So we have a lot to talk about today, as always. So we'll start with President Moon's visit to D.C. last week. So during his very short visit, he met with President Trump, along with other many advisors and policymakers. So what are some of the key takeaways from his visit last week?
Well, I think the key takeaway is that President Moon and President Trump are still on the same page in terms of how the process should move going forward. And what I mean by that is they both agreed that they want to maintain the top-down process, and they believe that the goodwill between President Moon and Chairman Kim and President Trump and Chairman Kim is sort of the key thing to this process. So you have that takeaway. And then I think the other big takeaway is that President Trump, if the circumstances were right, expressed an openness to actually having a trilateral summit. So a North-South Korea U.S. summit. And so I think those are sort of the two big takeaways. But, at the end of the day, this is the first post-Hanoi summit.
Right.
This was really, I think, a working level summit about talking through where things are, where we go now. And so I think the real point of the summit was, making sure we're on the same page and we have a way to go forward.
Right. So along with the Moon-Trump summit, in North Korea, there was also a party election where Chairman Kim Jong-un was voted as the chairman of the State Affairs Committee. And he also had some comments on the latest, the South Korea and the U.S. summit, and also the process. So could you tell us a little bit about what he said during his speech?
Yeah, so some of this isn't perhaps surprising. One of the North Korean themes going back months has been that, South Korea shouldn't allow the U.S. to take and stop it from doing inter-Korean engagement. This has been, like I said, a long-standing tactic to try and separate the United States and South Korea. So that's not necessarily surprising. We've seen, complaints over South Korea not moving to reopen Kaesong, Mount Kumgang, not doing the rail project right away. So, I think this fits into sort of this broader track and isn't necessarily surprising, especially with what happened in Hanoi, and we're not seeing progress on other fronts. The more interesting thing, which I think came out of his comments, was, he did talk and say that he would be open to a third summit with President Trump, but only if the United States, basically almost paraphrasing President Trump's big deal, made a big change and that it, stopped its calculation. And he actually refers to the U.S. as being calculating. And so, essentially that the U.S. should take and provide relief and come more to sort of North Korea's position on how to do denuclearization. The challenge I think here is that he's basically asking the U.S. to make a major change without North Korea making one. And I think in any negotiation, both sides have to give. So the question is if he wants to see flexibility from the U.S., how much flexibility is he willing to show on his side as well? The other, I think, key thing that came out of this is, at least for the moment, we have a nominal deadline. He said he's willing to be patient, and that he's given the United States until the end of the year. So, December 31st, I guess, is, our new deadline. But at the end of the day, both he and President Trump have said they're open to a third summit. Both he and President Trump at various times have essentially said that, something needs to be different. There's no point in them meeting to have the same conversation as they had, and I think they both understand that. So now the question, I think, really, even though we're doing this top-down process, is can we have working level talks that allow the two sides to maybe bridge a few gaps between each other's positions that then would actually make it viable to have the two leaders meet again?
Yeah, so I thought his end of the year comment was kind of interesting. And President Trump kept saying that there's no rush and he's not rushing. So we'll see if we will see any moving forward until the end of the year. So President Moon actually had a meeting this morning with his advisor and had a little comment on the summit and Kim Jong-un's speech as well. So what did he have to say?
I think, and this makes sense for President Moon, and to be honest, it would make sense if it was President Trump. He put the positives on this. Kim Jong-un has committed himself to the process, which, is true, and that he is also taken and committed to meeting with President Trump again. Both of those things are true. You could see maybe other interpretations that, Kim Jong-un's comments are an attempt to, pressure the United States and South Korea, or that they're showing a lack of patience. But it's also true that he is still willing to meet, and he is, still willing to talk about the denuclearization issue. I think, the thing that comes down to this, you mentioned this idea that President Trump isn't in a hurry, and also that Kim Jong-un has put a deadline. Right. I think if you look at this from a practical perspective, can President Trump really negotiate a deal once the presidential primaries start? And so whether this is an attempt to pressure the United States, or whether this is just simply a clear North Korean reading of the political reality in the United States, that getting a deal will become potentially infinitely harder as President Trump moves into the campaign cycle. One, because his time will get pulled away. And, I know a counter argument might be, well, that's the perfect time to negotiate with him because he'll want a deal, he'll be willing to give more. But I also think coming out of Hanoi, Kim Jong-un has already seen that President Trump is willing to walk away once again. And if he were to get a deal in the presidential cycle that might be seen as perhaps too generous to North Korea, I'm sure he would be criticized by both Republicans and Democrats in the United States. And that's the last thing President Trump wants. So in some ways, from a North Korean perspective, the prospects that Trump might actually walk away again to show he's tough on North Korea during a campaign are probably more likely. And so I think some of this is probably calculation in terms of what is politically feasible in the United States.
Yeah, 2020 is coming up very, very soon.
Yeah, sooner than we realize.
Right. And also, during Moon Jae-in's comments, he also mentioned that he's willing to meet with Chairman Kim Jong-un again in any format and a venue without the whole formality.
And President Trump essentially endorsed, it seems like, this idea of a next inter-Korean summit. And that might be the next logical step because, since Hanoi, neither President Trump or President Moon have met with Kim Jong-un. So President Moon's had a chance to take stock with President Trump. Maybe it makes sense to take stock with Kim Jong-un now.
Yeah. So there's also speculation that President Moon might be sending a special envoy to North Korea, but we'll see if that happens or not. And we also heard this morning that President of Russia, President Putin, might be meeting with Kim Jong-un, but not confirmed yet. So we'll see if there's any movement on that end.
Yeah. Though the Kremlin has apparently said they are in talks to have a meeting. So nothing is set, but it looks like the wheels are turning on this.
Which would be interesting because Russia hasn't been really involved in the process.
And I mean, Putin himself has played sort of an interesting and contradictory role over time. Early on in the process, he made offers. This was back when, Kim Jong-il was still alive, to essentially take and offer to put North Korean satellites in orbit. So this would eliminate North Korea's, supposed need for this ballistic missile program and everything. So even though North Korea hasn't necessarily taken Russia up on what actually are constructive offers, Russia also has broader economic interests in this, in terms of one, they want to sell gas to South Korea. They need to get a pipeline through North Korea. North Korea is an obstacle. So Russia has an interesting role here in terms of being potentially constructive, but, at the same time, you have awkward relations between the United States and Russia right now. North Korea and Russia are both countries under U.S. bilateral sanctions, so Russia could also play, an unconstructive role here too. So it'd be interesting to see which way Putin decides to go.
Absolutely. And we'll have more updates on North Korea issues next week. So I want to switch gear and talk about South Korean domestic issues for a little bit. So last Thursday, there was a huge historical constitutional court ruling in South Korea where the court ruled its 66 years old law that made abortion a crime unconstitutional, which is huge in South Korea, especially during this time around. I mean, right now where the gender equality issues is just exploding. So prior to the ruling, any female that decided to end her pregnancy, it was punishable up to a year in prison. Also, the doctor who performed the abortion would have faced 2 years in jail. So we also had the same issues in the United States and along with other countries. So how do you see this similar to the situation in the U.S.?
So when we look at what the court has decided here, in 2012 they had a previous decision,
Right.
and in that decision they ruled that basically the life of the fetus needed to be protected, and that's why abortion remained illegal. In this case, you know, I haven't had a chance to necessarily read the South Korean decision in detail, but the reporting seems to indicate that, you know, this decision is based on the idea of that by making abortion illegal, you are limiting a woman's right to choose. And so, you know, there are similarities here clearly to the Roe v. Wade case where, you know, we're talking about privacy issues and other things of that nature. But, you know, I think what is interesting about this ruling is regardless of which side you're on, whether you believe abortion should be legal, and according to polls, 75% basically of women of childbearing age believe abortion should be legal, you know, or whether you believe it should be illegal. What the court has now done with this decision is it's basically put the National Assembly in the position of having to take and change the law. And what I mean by that is that the court ruling says that they have to put in place a new law by the end of 2020, and if they don't, then the law becomes null and void, and so there would be no law on abortion. So really now it's about the National Assembly and the Moon administration figure out under what terms perhaps they want to take and make abortion allowable rather than really whether it should be legal or not.
Right, and then while reading the New York Times article on this, I found the interview from the women's activist group. The quote from that organization really interesting was that back in the early days, they put a limit on how many children they can have because the population was just overgrowing, out of control in South Korea, and now they're restricting, you know, whether women have right to have children or not. So I thought that was very it really stood out to me during that interview.
And I mean, you know, it's somewhat similar to what you saw in China with the one-child policy. I think I read the same story. I think the quote was something like, 2 children is one too many was sort of the slogan at the time. And, you know, now that society, and it's not just because of, you know, government, you know, pressure to take and have people have fewer children, but also, you know, the cost of education having gone up. So much is getting invested into a single child. But you know, last year was a historic year, and not necessarily in a good way, in that the birth rate for the first time fell below 1. As you know, the replacement rate is 2.1, so that's, you know, 2.1 children per woman. So, you know, this really is sort of like one of the big defining issues for South Korea going forward is sort of, you know, how they're going to manage basically both population aging as they become a super aged country here by I think it's like 2024 if I remember correctly, and also how you deal with, you know, just this declining birth rate.
Right.
And it's going to hit them on both ends.
Right, and also the implementation of abortion was another issue, right? So there were a lot of, even though it was illegal to have abortion, there were a lot of illegal abortion going on, and of course that comes with the health issues and the sanitary issues as well. So I mean, we're going to see a lot of debate on this moving forward. It seems like even within the government, different ministries have different view on this. And of course, when it goes to the National Assembly, there will be very heated debate on this as well. So definitely you will hear about this a lot going forward. Is there anything else you want to mention for this week? Anything we should keep an eye on?
Well, just, and I know you said we'll talk more about North Korea next week. One of the things that I thought was interesting from last week is, you know, we have this issue of fine dust in South Korea. You know, it's a major issue. You can debate how much of it comes from, you know, China and how much of it is produced domestically from vehicles and power plants and things. But in something that's unlikely to help deal with a fine dust issue, North Korea announced that they're going to look into building more coal-fired power plants. You know, it makes sense. On the one hand, they have lots of coal. But at the same time, it's only going to increase the fine dust pollution. So, you know, when you think about this issue, which impacts South Korea a great deal, I was there a few weeks ago, and the first couple of days were really bad. You know, at the end of the day, you know, this is another reason to really sort of try and engage North Korea and find ways to work with them on constructive projects. You know, whether you're thinking about sanctions or not, North Korea, whether you're thinking about like this year or 5 years from now, clearly economic growth is something that's on Kim Jong-un's mind. And for that, you need power. And for that, I think, the beauty of North Korea, if there ever was such a thing, and it seems strange to say that because of the nature of the state, but because it's not developed, you can really kind of build from scratch in terms of the energy infrastructure. And the question is not only for South Korean health, but for a lot of other reasons, does it make sense to try and work with the North Koreans on more renewable energy, more cleaner sources, coal being the dirtiest of them all? To be honest, the Russian pipeline, if that were to take and be done, would provide less pollution if you had gas-fired plants than coal-fired. So something interesting, something to watch. It's unclear when North Korea would really get these plants started and up and running. It takes about a year to build one anyways. But something I think people should keep in mind, both in terms of South Korean air pollution, but also in terms of how we engage North Korea as well.
Absolutely. And air pollution really doesn't have a boundary. So because they're so close to each other, it could affect both ways, obviously. Well, thank you so much for your insights and for joining us today. And thank you so much for watching. And that's it for this week. And we'll see you next Monday at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.